healthcare system is broken, but it doesn't have to be. This is Revenue Cycle Optimized by Infinx Healthcare. We discuss the latest challenges in the revenue cycle space and provide actionable tips on how to overcome them at your organization.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Stuart Newsome, and I'm really glad you joined us today for a session that really hits at the heart of every revenue cycle leader's worst nightmare. And I'm talking about timely filing. So today's episode is called Protecting Revenue with Safety Nets for Timely Filing. Seems appropriate, right? Well, I'm thrilled to welcome Tad Miller, who's the AR manager at NI2, which is an Infinx company. Tad brings a lot of experience from the front lines of AR management, and he's here to share real-world solutions that has helped his teams navigate one of the most challenging transitions in RCM teams can face. We all know we've gone through these EHR conversions, and this one was an example I think he's going to use as an epic go live and how that affected timely filing within that realm, within that time period. So Tad, it's really great to have you with us today. How you doing?
Good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to just, tapping into your experience and just unlocking, what happens with timely filing. Everyone's very familiar with it, but there are some things that just kind of get loose or lost or some blind spots, so to speak. So during today's episode, we'll explore how Tad and his team identified those blind spots in claim workflows. I know that you refer to them as hidey holes in work queues, so to speak. And, how can we implement safety nets to prevent millions of dollars, and I'm talking millions of dollars in revenue from slipping away due to missed timely filing? It's a big problem that people don't realize out there. So we'll talk about the reports that he's built, how to proactively flag deadlines across multiple payers and make leadership look like, what does that leadership look like during the go live chaos? Because we all know it's very chaotic. This is one of those conversations that's both tactical as well as timely, no pun intended, but it's especially if you're preparing for a system install or trying to get ahead of the AR issues in your current workflows. So we're just going to dive right in. So, and kind of get right to it. And as we were prepping for this, you've said before that your motivation for all this was driven by some past mistakes. I know the biggest teacher in life is always mistakes, right? Or pain points. So I'm sure this was a good motivator. So what was your first sign, that timely filing in particular was at risk when you were integrating and doing this transition for a recent client?
Yeah, it really didn't stem from the recent client. It was more my timing of joining Infinix. So when I joined Infinix, the client was about 100 days into their Epic install. And typically, your timely filing deadlines for most payers start around 120 days, 180 days. There's a few clients that could be 90, but just the timing of it and like you said, recent experience, I wanted to get some measures put in place to avoid, we were approaching those timely filing deadlines. So I really wanted to put some measures in place to avoid, timely filing and timely appeals. So, and you had discussed, I learned some lessons. I come from a large academic medical center in the Midwest, and we had also installed the Epic billing system. And through that process, we identified work queues, we followed the Epic process, we identified, correct users, correct supervisors of those work queues and managers that were to monitor, make sure these work queues were getting worked. Well, we found out really the hard way after it was too late that we had many work queues sitting out there that hadn't been worked. And by the time we noticed this, it was past timely filing. So we had lots of timely filing issues with those related to work queues. In addition, when you go through an install, you're going to have higher claim issues and higher, denials. So throughout that, there's just a lot of, maybe lack of a better word, chaos, that things get missed. And so a lot of those kind of fell through the cracks and went to the payers and returned timely. So a lot of the metrics that we're going to talk through today stemmed from, we wanted to put some stop gaps. After we, found out we had a timely filing issue, we wanted to put these measures in place to make sure going forward, timely filing was a non-issue.
Right, right. Because I mean, think about it. I mean, everyone when you're doing an EHR integration or EHR transition, there, as you well put it, there's a lot of chaos. There's obviously checklist implementation plans. Everything, at least from my experience, seems to be centered around converting the data, and training and putting the software in place from a technical standpoint. So it's very technical. No one really, at least they don't pay attention to those workflows. And so there are some things that fall through the gaps, and this can be a huge issue to try and catch. And I would imagine when you said that the work queues were going unnoticed, they're kind of being ignored, or maybe no one was aware of them, but so I think reports would come in handy for that. So how do you build reports that trigger action, from the staff in particular, and the staff actually paying attention to those reports and acting on those reports?
Yeah, and Epic and probably most billing systems have a good dashboard system to help identify some of the work queues out there that need attention. My issue with dashboards is it really requires staff or leaders to go out there and search for the information that they need. So they have to go in, dig in, and things still get missed. So I wanted to create some reporting around how can leaders police the entire system as a whole with relative ease. So the first couple of things that we had Epic develop were pretty simple work queue reports. So there's a PV work queue, or work queue report, and an HB work queue report. What it simply does is it pulls all work queues on the PV side of Epic, similar on the HB side, but then there's a lot more metrics to this report, but the key indicator is basically days since last access. So I can quickly pull that PV report, sort the report oldest to newest, and I can go out there and quickly see, hey, this work queue hasn't been touched in 200 days. So probably someone doesn't know what's out there. Or
Mhm.
in similar fashion, something's hasn't been worked in 21 days. Well, obviously it has been being worked. So what happened that in recent, couple weeks that it's not being worked now, and leadership can look at these reports and quickly get a feel of what's out there. And these reports, I know we're talking timely filing for this meeting, but these reports also help you with what we talked about, the hidey holes out there. So pockets of AR that are sitting there that we think are being worked, but they're actually not. And it affects all your AR metrics and so these reports help in that aspect as well. And
Right,
then
right.
on the timely filing side of things, we created 4 reports basically. And again, Epic System has the ability to implement all of your timely filing guidelines by payer. And also you can implement all your timely appeal guidelines by payer. So these reports, there's 2 reports on the HB side and 2 reports on the PB side. It just basically says, look at those metrics. Any claim out there that's 21 days to that metric, pull to this report. Similar on the appeal side. So if you've already filed a claim, you got a denial, anything that hasn't been worked or reworked or resent to the payer that's within those 21 days, pull that to this report. So you can quickly, again, police the entire system, find those claims that might be slipping through the cracks that your staff may be a little bit overwhelmed. It's a new system. You don't want those to slip through the cracks and be too late. So it gives you an overview of everything in the system that's approaching timely filing, so you can get people on that and get those things resolved and resubmitted prior. The last thing we did is similar to exactly the similar concept as the reports. Is I created 4 work queue rules. So staff could go in, say like every Monday, which we require our staff every Monday come in, apply those rules in their work queue within their specific inventory, their payers. And in theory, if they apply the appeal and the timely filing work queues every Monday, it pulls all those claims that are in danger of hitting timely, they work them all, and then they can switch over and do their normal workflow, their normal sorts. But they do that every Monday, in theory, you shouldn't have any timely filing or timely appeals, because they're all getting work within that 21-day window.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, especially with you've mentioned a lot of key things that we're hearing and resonating with a lot of our clients and prospects where it's, staff doesn't have enough time, they're not catching things, probably because they're overwhelmed. There's also little pockets of AR here or there that they just can't get to. And I know you're very aware that we have, really spoken about even on office hours and in our podcast, Revenue Cycle Optimized, the concept of AI agents. Well, it's not a concept, it's a reality. And we're actually deploying, the AI agents to have, be very useful in this capacity, especially for our denials management platform that we have, where we can actually take that information. And I'm just thinking, as an idea that during this transition, it's originally was designed to help everyone in AR denials management, work their claims and predict what is the recovery for that. And based on that prediction of revenue, that predictive score, that they can then work those, and timely filing is a factor. However, they can work them and prioritize them based on the recoverability of that rather than, the traditional methods of, let's go after the bigger dollars. So hearing you speak is kind of getting my wheels turning, as sometimes it does. It's like this could be probably used, or a modification of that platform could be used, to help with these transitions. Because you're describing a very good process that you've developed, but then how can we, supercharge that by inserting an AI agent that you still can augment the existing staff. So I don't know about your thoughts on that, but as I'm hearing you talk, it just resonated with me that, wow, this is a great place to have an AI agent, of which we have in our ARDM platform, AR denials management platform. So with that said, what advice would you give to a new manager facing their first Epic go live? I think everyone's got their first Epic go live. I don't know. I know there are those out there who have gone live with Epic. Maybe they're at another facility and now they're going live with Epic again at where they changed jobs or changed facilities. So there's those who have experience. But for those who just don't know what they're getting into, what would you say to them?
Well, I mean, I have a few things for especially your first one. In Epic or any billing system, I would say if you're going into that go live, I would have these measures put in place prior to go live. Have your programmers build these, the sooner the better. Even if you're into an Epic go live or any system go live, get these measures in place, because you will, it's a little bit chaotic, I would say. One thing I would do for an organization and is really have someone that has power or has decision making ability to be the ones that kind of police the system. For example, if you run these work queues reports and there's a pocket of 5 or 6 work queues that are not being worked, they can easily fire off emails. They have the power to fire it off to a manager or to a supervisor. Hey, get this work. Or if it's not the proper owner, let's talk through it. They have the decision, the power to implement that stuff. Same thing on if you pull an AR report and timely filing, there's 20 claims that are approaching timely filing on Blue Cross. They have the ability and power to fire those emails off and get that stuff worked. One thing that when I came to Infinix and noticed that Regional West, the facility that we're working for, and Infinix had a very strong partnership already developed, and they had reoccurring meetings. So a big thing is get these reoccurring meetings to talk through the issues on the books. It's sooner rather than later. We talk through several different meetings on a weekly basis, talk through the issues, the follow-ups, where we're at. Are there takeaways that someone needs to go check with someone? Just really try to push these issues through and get them resolved as quick as possible. Because you're going to have a lot of tickets flying around. And on that same topic, I would recommend a centralized kind of approach to tracking issues. You can have multiple managers filing tickets, but make sure you track them on a centralized document, and maybe even have a person that kind of monitors that process. You just don't want tickets out there and they're not organized, lose track of the issues. And then I guess the last thing I would recommend is as you go through these issues and get them resolved, you can have a manual workaround or manual process as you get the claims out the door in the interim, but make sure you have an electronic solution going forward, not a manual one. And then sometimes when you're going through a go live, there's going to be a lot of fires to put out. Make sure before you resolve that actual issue, before you close that ticket, make sure you have all the AR cleaned up that was a result of that issue. Make sure you get all the claims back out the door, because if you quickly move on, you leave kind of the backlog sitting there, you go to the next issue, you're going to have a pretty big AR nightmare. So make sure you get that backlog resolved prior to moving on.
Yeah, because I know that could be a distraction because I mean, if you start another task before completing the task at hand, then your focus is not on that previous task. And so if there's some loose ends that need to be tied up, particularly AR, which is probably the most important loose end, it's because the reason for the problem caused all this damage, then you got to go clean up the damage too. You can't just solve the problem, with processes, and whether it's manual, whether it's an AI agent, as I mentioned earlier, and you really do have to be sure that that AR is cleaned up before moving to the next. So that's really sound advice. I don't think people think of it that way because everyone's just so central on, hey, here's a problem. I'm going to solve the problem. It's a process problem. Let's change the processes. But they've still left the main issue, which was money on the table. And it's going to not be recoverable because it's just going to be forgotten because now their focus is on the next thing. So the previous task never really got 100% completed because they've moved on to the next thing. And that's where their focus is right now.
And
And,
that comes from
and
a past experience as well. Is really just moving on and let's fix the next issue, let's fix the next issue, but then really not focus on, hey, we needed to clean this stuff up, and now we have our ARs growing because we didn't simply clean that up.
right, right, right. And it's hard because these conversions, whether it's Epic or it could be any other EHR conversion, but Epic in particular, everyone's at Mach 5 with their hair on fire, right? So,
Mhm.
you just have to get to the next thing. And that's what's forefront in their mind. But sometimes being patient, taking the time to having the discipline to we can't move to the next unless we solve this problem and clean it up. So yeah, very, very, very sound advice. Which I guess leads to the next question, regarding, what's one mistake? And I'm sure there are more than one mistake, but what's one mistake that sticks out to you that you see over and over when it comes to timely filing, in particular with these EHR transitions?
Yeah, and even though like any billing system install is going to increase the likelihood of timely filing issues just through the chaos and people in new systems, you're going to have obviously more claim type issues, you're going to have more denials. But I would say just in general, I would look at, not just timely filing, but your controllables, all your controllables. Can you put things in place in the system to prevent them? And if you're not even going through, I think all organizations can use this. And if you're not going through an install, put these measures in place because they will help identify things that even if you're not going through a billing install, that would help you identify. Controllable adjustments are called controllable for a reason. They're obviously preventable. So thinking in unique ways of how can I build something just as maybe a safety net on the back end to make sure this doesn't go out without the proper documentation that's going to result in a denial, and especially a controllable one that organizations lose a lot of revenue because they just don't have some of these safety measures in place. So
Right, right. And again, I sound like a broken record, but I really feel, just this tremendous opportunity, not only for AI, those AI agents in this situation to help clean that up, but working in concert or side by side with human specialists. So the human specialist can focus on the more complex, and there may be, as you say, those controls in place that the AI can actually take care of. And it can be very modular, be very central and focused on a specific task that they have to perform. And then you can actually get it done, a lot quicker, a lot faster. Sometimes the simple solution is, again, going back to prioritizing, what do we work first to optimize getting this done correctly? And AI can help with that as well. It's just, I know AI has kind of hit the ground running for the last couple of years. Now with AI agents, it's really improving at a very rapid pace that even the payers are utilizing this. And so it's just very important, to be in step with the times. And everything you're describing is just great and sound advice, and it's based on experience. And it takes a lot of lift from the human element. And it's still going to take a lot of lift from the human element. But if you could introduce AI agents into this model, then it's gonna have reap tremendous rewards, where not only in getting it done quicker and faster so you can move on to the next task, but just in cleaning up and in ongoing identifying certain things, whether it's your analytics, and you can, load those analytics. I think you stated earlier, sometimes there's missing gaps and, those blind spots, those hidey holes where their analytics are. This is something that can be captured, with AI as well. So don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No,
On
I mean, it all sounds, I think there's tremendous opportunity to implement a lot of that stuff too.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to some Q&A with the audience. I do have one from the audience, Tad. What check and balance systems would you recommend when doing a conversion to make sure that there would be no timely filing issues? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of answered that question is really having a system in place to police the entire system
Mhm.
with ease. You know, those are the kind of the metrics. You can go out and dig into dashboards and things of that nature. But if you can have a total of 6 reports that someone, obviously with authority, but I would recommend as many people have eyes on these reports as in the leadership roles,
Mhm.
supervisors, managers, have eyes on this and kind of can watch their own staff or the better checks and balances you have in place, but really at least have someone that can, and really that's assigned to do this on a timely basis and just really look through that. And like I say, when we created those work queue rules, that was kind of the make sure you do this every single week, you know, and then you kind of avoid those. You're within that 3 week window. You do it every week. You shouldn't have any timely filing or timely appeals because they are worked every single week.
All right. If you have that consistency where you're working it as they're occurring, then yeah, nothing piles up. Yeah. Very awesome. So I have one more question here, and this question is from the audience as well. This question, it looks like it resonated with staff paying attention to cues. When you were talking about cues not being noticed and the work not being noticed to being done there. And so they're saying we've had trouble getting our staff to consistently work flag cues. What strategies help your team stay engaged and consistent?
Yeah, I mean, again, those two simple work queue reports, and I had mentioned earlier there's more data that comes with those reports, but what those reports also bring is it'll identify the work queue owner, the work queue supervisor, and the work queue manager. So if you're monitoring those work queue reports, you can easily see, and if your managers are pulling in, hey, my supervisor, and here's the owner, and it has not been worked in 2 weeks, you can really drive that, and the manager can work with their supervisor, obviously, and figure out what's going on with this work queue. Why isn't it being worked? Why is staff not engaged? And then they were engaged at one point, but now it hasn't been touched in 2 weeks. What's going on? So really just using those work queue reports and pulling them and identifies exactly who's responsible. You could come to a point too where we thought this report or this was the right owner, but really it's not. So then you can work through as a leadership team to really assign the correct owner to that to make sure it gets worked. And then again, I mentioned several times, really having that person that has the authority to police the system be that person, right? Director level or someone that can really really just easily send out the notifications that this needs to be worked directly to those managers and supervisors.
Certainly, certainly. Yeah, you're just building accountability and then making sure everyone is responsible, for the work that they should be doing. So awesome. Well, that's all we have for questions. So, Tad, thank you again for joining us today. Awesome job. Very insightful recommendations and advice. Again, it's based on experience. So, you're just telling us what has worked for you in the past. And we really appreciate your insights today. And we also appreciate everyone for joining on this episode. So, please join us next week as we have another episode. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. Subscribe to get notified when our next episode is online. For more information for how we can help you increase reimbursements at your company, check out our website at infinix.com. That's infinx.com.